Well, good morning. Today, the Executive Committee of the City meets for the first time in 2021. There is no doubt, of course, that the predominant focus at City Hall has been and will continue to be on fighting COVID-19, but there are other things to be dealt with as the city goes on preparing for the future and making sure that it's properly run. I will say that the city's strategic command team meets every single morning to discuss updates and to discuss current conditions with respect to COVID-19. And the immunization task force had another meeting last night, as it does on a regular basis, to make absolutely sure that when supply is available and consistent with provincially set priorities for who gets vaccinated when, that we're ready to play the city's role in delivering those vaccinations. I can assure you that based on the plans that we have been making since before there was a vaccine, the city will be ready to carry out its part of that responsibility. We're doing all this while continuing to make progress on issues facing the city, some of them shorter term, some of them longer term, some related to COVID, but others relating, of course, to transit, to policing, to housing, and to poverty reduction, just to name a few. So before I take your questions, I wanted to acknowledge some of the progress that is being made on a number of fronts with items that will be discussed at the Executive Committee today. First, the Cafe TO report. This will ensure that this very successful program to support restaurants with more outdoor dining options will be bigger and better than ever, and it will be earlier this year. This is a good thing. It is welcomed by the industry, and we know that residents love this program as well. I think it improved the quality of life of our city overall. Most importantly, we are taking action on this now so that we will be ready to implement the Cafe TO installations starting in May, provided that we are successful in stopping the spread of COVID-19 and getting those kinds of numbers in proper order. Second, the Smart Track report is at committee today. Smart Track is moving forward, and the result will be more transit to move more people sooner inside the City of Toronto. City staff confirm that Smart Track is projected to be completed by 2026, ahead of Ontario's subway lines, so that it will be the first opportunity after the opening of the Eglinton Crosstown to add a significant number of new transit stations to help the people of the City of Toronto get around. The agreement between the city and the province also includes an expectation for service on a basis more frequent than regular GO service when higher demand levels are reached. There is a mutual understanding between the province of Ontario and the City of Toronto that more transit is needed now and that we need to get it done as soon as possible. And I'm committed to doing everything we can in cooperation with the other governments to advance transit in the City of Toronto and to get people moving around this city. Third, we have the Community Safety and Crisis Response Program. The report going to the Executive Committee today recommends the approval of 4 community safety and crisis support service pilots. This, in a nutshell, would have mental health professionals and others, social service trained people, answering calls of people in distress as opposed to the police in appropriate circumstances. And it also would have the same program doing wellness checks on people in the community. The pilots respond to City Council's direction to staff in June of 2020, and I think it's worthy of note that that direction was given in June of 2020, and they're coming forward with a program that would begin to be implemented this year in 2021, and that is very quick work on something that is a very important initiative. If approved by Council, 3 pilots would be implemented in Northwest Toronto, Northeast Toronto, and the Downtown East. And these are the areas where apprehensions, for example, under the Mental Health Act and calls for people in crisis are the highest in the City of Toronto. And so I think there are very appropriate areas in which to begin a pilot that would see non-police resources respond to calls from people in crisis and hopefully achieve a better result. A 4th pilot would serve Indigenous communities. It would be Indigenous-led and would be co-developed with Indigenous communities. The pilots will work with healthcare providers, the community health centers, not-for-profit organizations that provide mental health and substance use services to ensure user-centered care continues during and after the initial intervention. The pilots will create multidisciplinary teams of crisis workers with training in mental health and crisis intervention, de-escalation, situational awareness, and field training prior to the launch of the pilot, so that you can see why it is taking a little bit of time to make sure we have the right people with the right training to achieve better outcomes on these calls to help people in distress, as distinct from the current arrangements, which has the police answering most of those calls most of the time because there often is no one else to answer those calls. The pilots are a step in the right direction, a significant step in the right direction. They are being done in the right way with the best advice from our professional public service staff, and they will help Toronto residents experiencing a nonviolent crisis. They begin a process of having many of these calls for people in distress answered by professionals other than our police officers. And this, in turn, will allow the police to focus on core policing priorities such as violent crime. Finally, we have on the agenda today the Connect TO report. Connect TO aims to increase digital equity and access to affordable high-speed internet in Toronto, especially in areas where people have difficulty achieving this kind of service, internet service, on an affordable, reliable basis. This city-driven program will leverage our municipal resources and assets to help bridge the increasing digital divide by expanding access to affordable, high-speed internet to underserved Toronto residents. Geographically, almost all of Toronto has the infrastructure to connect everyone to reliable internet, yet some Torontonians are being left behind, and that divide has grown during COVID-19. The report going to Executive Committee today recommends the creation of a city broadband network that would use city assets, such as existing fiber that we have put through the city for purposes of, say, the police or the Transit Commission or the Transportation Department, and also using things like buildings and light poles and sidewalks and boulevards to help address internet connectivity in underserved areas of the city, with the ultimate service itself actually being provided to homes by service providers other than the city. Having access to a reliable and affordable internet connection is a lifeline for many residents and businesses in Toronto. Certainly, we've seen that during the pandemic, but it's true in non-pandemic times as well. Today, far too many people are left behind when it comes to adequate internet service, and that means being left out for students. It means being left out for workers. It means being left out for ordinary community residents, and that is something that we cannot allow to continue. Connect TO will help to create a digitally connected Toronto, which means everyone can enjoy a better quality of life and access to opportunity and prosperity. So all of these items represent progress on helping businesses and residents during the pandemic through Cafe TO, through helping those in crisis, through the new program that is to be launched in pilot, on getting transit built, and on making sure everyone in our city is connected. And I'm looking forward to a day with plenty of public representation part of the day so that we can listen to their thoughts on these issues, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up, and could you please unmute yourself before or when you're called upon? Thank you. First up, we have Ashley Legassick from News Talk 1010. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question, Mayor Tory. In regards to Cafe TO, I'm just wondering what exactly is going to be changing from last year's program, and what feedback did you receive from restaurant owners about things that could be done better?
I think the desire is obviously there to have the program start as soon as possible, and that's why the applications will open in the next week or so, and that we will then allow the patios themselves to open in early May compared to well into June last year. We will allow some platforms and decks to be built, whereas last year that was kind of a more haphazard sort of thing. And our objective as well is to make the application and approval process as streamlined as possible to make it easy for people to take advantage of the opportunity.
Thank you. And my next question is about funding. So I just want to touch base about if any additional funding has been committed at this point from the provincial or federal governments for this year. And if not, what is the city doing now to address any potential shortfall?
Well, we're in the midst of discussions that have been going on for some time. The answer to the question as to whether there's any additional funding that has been committed is no. And I'll say no, not yet. I'm determined to make sure that they understand that cities, including Toronto with big transit systems, still face the same problem. We're operating the transit system at almost its full capacity, but we have ridership that's about 30% of normal. And so that means we're short literally hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and we don't want to cut services. We don't want to massively increase taxes. We certainly don't want to cut capital projects. And so it requires the other governments to come forward and help, as they did to a great extent last year. So I'm optimistic they will recognize the benefit of having the transit systems going, having capital projects proceed, not having huge service cuts or huge tax increases at this time in a crisis, and will help us out. But those are discussions that took some time last year, and I'm sure they'll take some time again this year, but I'm optimistic as to the result.
Thanks, Ashley. Next up, we have David Ryder. Go ahead, David.
In the report on ConnectTO, it talks about, I think it was 400 kilometers of fiber optic that was sold to the company Cogeco in 2008. I just want to be clear, is there an attempt by the city to take any of that back, or would the new network be using fiber optic network that is entirely under the city's control right now?
The report, as I read it and the discussions I've had with the officials, focuses first on fiber we still own in the ownership of, say, the police service, the transit commission, the transportation services department, just to name three that I think are mentioned in the report, and taking those fiber assets, and then maybe with a modest extension, you could take them into a neighborhood that is underserved. And then from there, a more robust, affordable service could be provided to local residents. So I think it's focusing on the assets we still own first, and seeing where we go from there. And that's why we're doing pilots, to see how this works and how quickly we can take advantage of the fiber assets that we own to have a network into some of these neighborhoods too, and then see what the take up is on the service.
Thank you. And my follow-up is about active TO. When we've asked in the past, you've sort of said, well, there's some things to figure out around the construction schedule. People, I'm sure, with the snow on the ground are looking forward to the time when there's no snow. Is there any update on that? And is there any chance it's going to be scaled down from last year because of construction?
I think, if anything, my objective would be to scale it up. And by saying that, I'm talking about what I've asked of the staff, which is that they look at opportunities to have an active TO corridor, if I can call it that, in other parts of the city. We had it downtown last year. It was a huge success. And it drew people from all over the city. And so there's no reason why we can't at least look at, say, a place we could do it in East York, North York, and Scarborough if the local people want it. So I've asked them to take a look at that. And then the other thing that we had to take account of was very significant construction occurring in particular in the west end of the downtown of the city, and how that would affect Lakeshore West in particular. And so we're examining that from the standpoint of whether it means Lakeshore West can't be used at all, which I don't think would be the case, or maybe would be able to be used at some times and not others. So that's the kind of consideration the staff are taking a look at, and we expect that report not for a few weeks yet, but it won't be too long.
Thanks, David. And lastly, we have Courtney Heels from CP24. Go ahead, Courtney.
Good morning. My question, Mayor Tory, is about the Smart Track plan. It's changed, of course, a lot over the years, going to 22 stations, now it calls for 5 stations. I'm wondering, are you still confident this transit plan will come together and really make a difference for underserved communities?
Any one single transit station that we're adding that gives people a point of access to be able to easily get on a train that can take them to some other part of the city, because these are transit stations inside the city, is a plus. This report contemplates 5 stations, and in fact, the 5 versus 22 is not an apples to apples comparison. We are getting many new transit stations of different kinds, including, for example, 2 that are at Spadina and Front and out in Mimico for GO train service that will be new transit stations inside the city that aren't per se Smart Track stations. I'm a believer that having, if you think about how much we herald a subway extension that would give us 5 new stations, it's a big deal. This is a big deal, having these 5 stations and others that will go along with them. And so I think it's all going to enhance the transit network, together with the significant investment being made by the Government of Ontario in new subways. And we're working together with them to make all of this happen. But the first up after the Eglinton Crosstown will be the Smart Track stations. They'll make a big positive difference for people in all parts of the city.
Follow up?
Thank you, sir. My next question, following up on some of the comments you made last night on our show, asking about the plan to dispatch staff, I understand today, to residential buildings who are seeing a high number of complaints over COVID restrictions. What will that look like? Will the building owners perhaps face fines? Will the tenants be looking at tickets? How is that going to roll out?
Well, we've generally adopted an approach that sort of tries education and persuasion and information first. And so we have a group of people that are called our Rent Safe TO program staff. And we've identified 12 locations that had more than 10 complaints each out of the 263 locations that had some complaints about people not wearing masks in the common areas. And so we're going to send them out. We're going to take with them some signage that we had prepared a long time ago and made available to landlords, who should have put that signage up to remind people of the requirement for masks. And it is a law. So in the end, if there are people who are just thumbing their nose when these people come to persuade them to do better, then obviously the enforcement people will take whatever action they see fit, I'm sure, including the writing of tickets.
Okay, that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.